We currently have an outline effect on our level's polygons. A few more controls are needed to clean up the lines and render them on the normal map details of our meshes. Taking our shader code that creates our polygon line effect, we'll expand it to affect the normals of our level. Before we concern ourselves with cleaning up the flickering faces, let's add the polygon outline effect to our normal maps. The polygon outline effect is drawing on the scene depth gbuffer. In order to get the same effect on our normal maps, we're going to want to use the world space normal. If we go to our lit button and down to buffer visualization, if we browse into this menu to world normal and select it, we see we have a colorful image that is the sum of all of the normal maps that are applied to each object through their material in the scene. The world space normal represents the direction or vector a given pixel faces in the world after computing tangent space normal maps applied through materials. RGB equals XYZ. This data is calculated in the rendering stage and used as a gbuffer by the deferred renderer to calculate lighting. We can use this gbuffer data in post-process materials to render effects on our scene's normals. So let's go and open up our material and let's expand this to full frame. And in order to draw our lines on our normal maps, we're going to use the exact same logic that we used to draw our lines on our polygons. So in order to demonstrate how this is going to work, let's just take the very first shader code that's drawing lines on the tops of our polygons. Let's copy that, and then let's paste it below all of the code that's drawing our polygons. Now let's take the root of our material and let's bring it down here. Let's re-minimize our material, and then let's exit the buffer visualization and go back into the lit mode so that we can see the effect. If I now take all of this code and I plug this in to the emissive, I can see I get right back to the first step in creating our polygon outlines. Let's save and take a look at the effect on the scene. It should look familiar. If I take each one of these scene texture material expressions that's looking at the scene depth and I select them all, at once I can change which gbuffer they're looking at. So let's change this to world normal, and now let's hit save. And right away in the scene, I can see now I'm shading the tops of my normal maps. If I go back to this 2 vector and I invert my v coordinate value to -1, I can see I've flipped the effect. And if I save it, I see it's happening in the scene. This is going to be the logic that we're going to use to draw the same lines on our normal maps. So now let's go ahead and delete this, and let's go back to our original code. Let's expand our material to full frame to get a better view. And let's select all of the shader code that is creating our polygon lines. And let's hit C. And we can see we have a new comment box that shows up around all of our nodes. This is great for organizational purposes because now I can select the box and move everything all at once. I can also comment on what they are. So let's call this polygon outlines. Let's take everything in this box. Let's copy it. Let's move down to an open space and let's paste it. And just like we just demonstrated, let's take all of these scene texture material expressions that are currently looking at the scene depth. Let's make sure we select every one of them. And now, all at once, I can change the lookup from the scene depth to the world normal. Now, the other thing we're going to need to do in order to get the effect to work properly is to reintroduce the green and the blue values into these masks. The reason is because normal maps utilize red, green, and blue value to determine how the bump should look. So if we select each one of the masks that's only including the red channel, we can now reintroduce the green and the blue. If I take the root node of my material and I plug the result of what we've just created into the emissive, and now I hit save, I can see I have lines being drawn on all of the normals in my scene. We also see that the color of the normal map is showing through as well. Let's expand the comment box. Let's also rename it to normal lines. And now at the end, after the final add, If I right-click and I type desat, I see under color, I have a desaturation node. Now the desaturation node is going to take an input and utilize a float value. So if I hold 1 and left-click, I can create a 1 constant through its fraction to determine how much desaturation should happen. So if this value is set to 0, there's no desaturation and full color will be shown. If we set this to 1, we have full desaturation and no color will be shown. So now if I plug this into the emissive and I hit save, I see I have desaturated lines being drawn on all of the normal maps. Let's expand this material to full frame. And now let's combine the normal lines with the polygon lines. Let's organize this a bit better. Let's create another add, and let's add the sum of all the polygon lines through this final add node with the sum of all the normal lines from this desaturation node. Then, if we plug the result of adding the polygon lines to the normal lines into our clamp, and then we add the result of coloring both the polygon and the normal lines over our base color, which is being drawn through our post-process input 0, and we combine all of that into our shader, and now we hit save. We have lines being drawn on the polygons and on the normal maps. We now have lines that render on our level's polygons and normals. While the effect works, additional controls will be needed to clean up and further customize how the lines render. In the following module of this course, we'll examine a few options for adjusting the line's thickness, contrast, and quality.